Lots to talk about. 335 is what we're talking about with Jay Foreman.
You are Locked On Huskers, your daily podcast on the Nebraska Cornhuskers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, gang, everybody. DP, 937 Ticket, Lincoln, America. Thank you for making Locked On Huskers your first watch, listen each and every single day. Greatly appreciated. This episode brought to you by the folks from FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Go to FanDuel.com/Locked On for discounts and rates, all the best bets and wagers. Get to it. Make every moment more. Thank you for doing that. Today's episode features a Husker Hall-of-Famer and a guy that can break down the thing that folks here want to talk about ad infinitum, the 3-3-5 defense. You want to talk 3-3-5 defense? Let's talk to the headhunter. Let's bring in the Hall of Famer. Sit on that edge. He can play anywhere in those 3-3s. He can play probably one of those 5 in the back. I think he can still handle for Jay Foreman, Husker Hall of Famer. Jay, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, man. It's just like everybody else. I'm trying to see how this defense is going to adapt or, I guess take on Big Ten offenses. So it's going to be interesting to see, the version that you see in year one versus maybe year two, and then try to compare to, the last couple of years at Syracuse. So it's a interesting time, but it's a good time in Husker land.
When I say the name Tony White, what comes to mind?
Well, I mean, look, he was an established player at San Diego State. Kirk Morrison, a good friend of mine that played in the NFL towards the end of my career, from San Diego State. So I know what he's kind of made of, just kind of in that system. Kirk Morrison made the transition to playing in the NFL from a 3-3-5, was a good playmaker. And so I expect the same from Tony because that's what he's played in. That's the way he's coached. That's what he was brought up in. He adapted it, when he went to Syracuse, and their defense, I think, was top 20 last year. The one thing I like about Tony White, even though I don't obviously know him personally, but just in his story, is that he got the most out of his roster. I think if there's ever a coaching, I would hang my hat on him as a coach. Where you look at his nose guard from last year, I think he was 5'11", listed at 265, and you think there's no way that he at a Power 5, school that he could be, effective. Well, actually, he was the tempo setter of their defense. A lot of times you saw him resetting the offensive line of scrimmage, making plays. And so what that told me about Coach White was he was able to look at a player, find a way to get him on the field, see the positive in his unique body type and his qualities, and then put him in his defense and be effective. And so I'm assuming he's thinking he's going to have more tools in the tool shed as far as size, weight, speed, and height here at Nebraska. So this version of 3-3-5, I'm assuming, like everybody else, is going to be a little bit different than Syracuse.
There's several options with the 3-3-5, and there's several different. You can talk about stack, you can talk about flexing in it. When you think 3-3-5 as a linebacker, what are some of the things that's going to ask these linebackers in Nebraska to do?
Well, the 3-3-5, when I really think of it, I think of it kind of like the old elephant defense with the 49ers with Charles Haley, right? 3 down linemen, one guy that could either have his hand in the dirt or stand up. That guy that's going to be the 4th guy on the line of scrimmage is got to be a dude. That's number one. Now, the stack linebackers are in a good position because it's going to be a little bit harder, in theory, for the offensive lineman to find out where you are. And so you have to be excellent in your run fits, in your pre-snap recognition, obviously first and foremost, and your communication, and then obviously you're going to be able to make plays. And so what you've seen at times, especially when you go back and say you watch Syracuse against Notre Dame, where they played pretty good, Syracuse against Pittsburgh, that's kind of Narduzzi, rough and tough Michigan State type of team, where they were able to get up into the line of scrimmage, again, meet the linemen, meet the running backs, and make some plays there. But then in the passing game, it gives them a little bit more flexibility with that kind of hybrid linebacker safety with the cornerback skills or safety cover safety skills to be more aggressive at the second level as far as covering the unique tight ends, the slot receivers, or the H-backs or running backs in the short areas. And so now if you look at Nebraska's, pass defense, from say a year or so ago, a full season ago, and a little bit at times this year, right? Especially at the beginning of the year, where did Nebraska get hurt at times? In the middle of the field, short area, passing area. well, this in theory will get it better. So if they can really take what Nebraska did well the second half of the season under Bill Bush and those guys when Mickey Joseph took over, and look at these guys and what they do, and then infuse them into this 3-3-5, I think you'll see success earlier on in the year and in Coach White's tenure versus later.
Jay, a lot of the 3-3-5, some of it's missed because depending on down and distance, it can be a 5-3-3. It can be you could actually roll back. You can roll that 5 up and bring 2 safeties downhill, and it's a 3-5-3 to take away those crossers that you said beat Nebraska up last year. As a linebacker, does it require you to play this game faster because you're going to be asked to do more things, or is this more control?
Well, I think the 3-3-5 in theory, just blanket 3-3-5 is really good against the spread. So then you would say, in my opinion, you'd play a little bit faster. In this defense in the Big Ten, I think you're going to get a little bit of both, and that's good. You need to be versatile. You should want versatile athletes, versatile football players. And so, look, the 3-3-5 everybody's talking about, but let's be honest, you're going to be in nickel defense a lot, which is good because in the 2 linebackers or 3 linebackers, they should be portable, and so there's not going to be a big change there. The 3-3-5 can cause confusion in the pass game, the blitz game, and in the run game. And so it's a big opportunity for all these players to play in a different defense, a unique defense, and allow more players to be involved in the defensive scheme. Now, what you have to do first and foremost is you got to be big, strong, physical, and technically sound up front. So those 3 guys up front, they got to come to play. They got to be good with their hands. They got to be able to stay on their feet, and they got to be able to make sure when they make a decision, whether right, wrong, or indifferent, they are clear and concise where they're going. And then it's the job at the second level and let's say the hybrid level, 2.5 level, to clean up all the garbage, and they got to communicate. And then if they can do that and get the basis down, it doesn't really matter what front they run because they'll be successful.
That's a good place to put a pin because I want to come back. We'll go to break here. We'll come back. I want to get into that. That front group, the gaps that they're going to be asked to play, the different skills that they're going to need to play within those gaps. And then we'll talk about the roster that currently exists for Nebraska and whether they have people on the roster who can do those things. We'll talk those things with Jay Foreman here on Locked On Huskers. Hey gang, DP here. Thank you for following and allowing us to do what we do each and every single day for making Locked On Huskers the first watch, listen every single day. Your second watch and listen should be Locked On College Basketball. Isaac Shade and Andy Patton will take you through. They'll talk to some of the best coaches, some of the best players on the floor and off the business that is college basketball and get you prepared for March Madness. So Locked On College Basketball, go find it. You can find it on YouTube or however you consume your podcast. To do that, we're here with Husker Hall-of-Famer Jay Foreman. And Jay, talking about 3-3-5, and you talked about that front 3. Look, depending on how you play Wisconsin versus how you play Ohio State would be different with the interior 3. You as a linebacker standing behind them and relying on them sometimes to occupy blockers. Sometimes it's just to occupy a gap. What type of communication is required when the gaps vary, the responsibilities vary, and then you have new verbiage with a new coaching staff and new players?
Yeah, it's going to be, it's a learning curve. So the expectation is everybody's going to dive into their playbook. If you're a good coach, you got to be an excellent teacher. You can't be just a blanket teacher, which is, in Cliff Notes version, just draw it up on the board and everybody's supposed to learn one way. So you're going to have to teach a guy by showing him. Some can learn by just looking in the playbook. Then some are going to be visual learners. So the onus is on the players and coaches to make that connection. Now, as far as, the big guys up front, obviously a little thin on the defensive line. You've lost a lot of defensive linemen in the last couple of years. I mean, that's Nebraska's not immune to losing guys, whether it's to the NFL or just the eligibility ran out. And so ultimately, a lot of the younger guys and the guys that need to step up, like Ty Robinson needs to play big this year. Nash needs to play big. Whether it's Judy out of the transfer portal or Wynn, that came in from Alabama this second year in Nebraska, he's got to take a step forward. You need about 5 or 6 guys, that can, not only play, but play well and not just be out there and be placeholders. So it's a tremendous opportunity. There's a lot of unknowns. ultimately for me as a linebacker, I didn't care if you made a mistake or not. Now, obviously, I felt like my job as a linebacker was to make sure that you knew exactly what I needed from you on a play-to-play basis, game-to-game basis, heck, even a practice-to-practice and meeting-to-meeting basis, because I felt like the better that I could communicate with you, the better that you would play. And I had confidence enough in my skills that I knew the defense well enough that I could go either A or B, regardless of what you did. Now, in early, you need to own your gap, but then that means you just don't stay blocked. And so I think one of the things that they could do is learn how to play with their hands, own their gap, and then get their pads square, and then find the ball and create some havoc. And so whoever does that best, I'm sure they'll leap to the top of the leaderboard as far as who's getting the most reps and thought of as a starter. And that's at second and third level as well. And so, there's not too many guys that are, sleeping well at night thinking that they're in cemented as starters, and that's a good thing. And so it's an evolution of college football. When you don't win, there's going to be change. And so now you're having a new scheme, new verbiage. And if you have any aspirations of playing in the NFL, you will have new coaches sometimes on a year-to-year basis. Now, some things are transferable, as far as, the verbiage. But one coach might call one technique one way versus another. And so you have to be a consummate professional. You have to be a pro. You have to be a football guy. You got to love football. You can't just think I need to know my job, because you have to know everybody else's responsibility for you to accentuate what you do well. So, as I guess stressful or anxiety laden this time could be, it's actually a time where you should really embrace it, because everybody's on a level playing field. The faster and the more that you dive into the playbook, the more you can separate yourself. So the opportunity is there. There's no preconceived notions. There's no favoritism. The best guys got to play, because ultimately, Nebraska, in my opinion, I keep saying it's not a rebuild. It's a reshape, reform. I think you just take what we did the last, I don't know, what was it, 7-8 weeks, and then you try to pump that up and go from there, and try to start winning or not. And that's what the expectation is going to be. This isn't the time to go on training wheels and be okay with just being average. So let's up the intensity and expectations, and let's try to prove yourself right versus proving somebody else wrong that you necessarily don't know.
Jay, this is the one of those conversation threads that happens here in Nebraska specifically, that over the course of the last few years, being able to get past pressure with the lineman up front.
Sure.
And you're going 3-3-5. So the very intent of this thing is that you're going to bring additional pressure from unknown places at unknown times. But with the people that you just mentioned, is there somebody in that group who can get pressure for Nebraska in this 3-3-5?
Well, I think I didn't mention him. I think Jamari Butler is potentially could, have a good year. He's a guy that is new to football, but he's showing some potential. You'd like to see Ty Robinson be more consistent, to be a tempo setter, from an execution standpoint, but then also being a big factor. I mean, he's a big kid. You think of it, when you see him walking around, you think like this guy is destined to be, a superstar. So he needs to start playing like it. So if you get those two guys going, and then you need some other guys that, either they run games well, run stunts well. You can say Blaze Gunnerson has obviously made some leaps and bounds. And then you're hoping that AJ Sherman, right? You got to think that he has some tangible tape, kind of a la Trey Palmer last year, that he's played some actually real snaps for the University of Georgia, need an opportunity, that he's ready to go. And then everything can kind of, fall off the waterfall from there. But look, the best thing for a defensive back is a consistent pass rush. The best thing for a defensive line is a consistent coverage. So it has to marry together, and so what that comes from communication, that comes from knowing what everybody needs to do. It comes from clear, directive from the defensive coordinator to the position coaches. What are their expectations down in and down out, third down, second and short, second and long, the position on the field, all that type of stuff all leads to getting a big sack day, or which I think is just important, the amount of times you can get the quarterback off the spot, let alone get some hits on the quarterback in this day and time of college football. So it's got to be emphasis, right? It's got to be emphasis on fundamentals, technique, communication, turnovers, and not just be the team that tries to, make that one last play. Let's make some plays. And you saw that I keep going the second half of the season. You saw them make you saw the Rutgers game. You saw them play. I call it small ball football. Play clock management. Kind of paralyze Rutgers to getting into the position to where you can make game sealing plays. That comes from the clearness and the conciseness of a defensive scheme. Allow guys to play to their strengths. Don't ask somebody to do something that 8 times out of 10 they can't do. Get them to do something that they can do well 8 times out of 10. And then let's clear up the 2 that they don't. And so I think if you can do that, I think that not only sets the foundation for success on defense, it sets the tempo and the foundation for your team, special teams, and obviously offense as well.
That's another pinpoint. There's so much in this thing, Jay, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you, and I'm thankful and appreciative you would do this. We'll go to one final break, come back, and I'll ask Jay about the best group on this defense. I'll ask him to go deep here on Locked On. Once again, we thank the legend, Hall of Famer, Jay Foreman, for having. Yeah, you go ahead and take that, man. Go ahead and take that. Go ahead and take that from us. Thank you for joining us today and sharing some knowledge and insight on what's going on within the Husker program. Things to look forward to have your eyes forward to. This episode was brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. FanDuel.com/Locked On. Jay, the best group on this defense seems to be this loaded room in the back end. Let's go through some of the fellow folks that are there and your thoughts on what makes this the best group in the room.
Well, I think I know Marcus Buford got injured at the end of the season, but I have a 100% confidence that he'll bounce back. First of all, he's a football player. He's a tough kid. He's a competitive kid. He's a great team guy. He's a leader. Then you got Miles Farmer, who I think that, after starting the season a little rough, I think he made some big strides towards the end of the season. You saw him to be more active. I think he cleaned up some tackling issues. Then you got Malcolm Hartzog that came in and was just competitive. You can tell he loves football and he loves to compete, and he just seems like a sponge. And so I think when you have 4 guys out there, whereas Quentin Newsome, who I think is probably the bell cow, I think he made a huge step last year as well. Very consistent, which probably started from changing his practice habits in the preseason, led to the season, stepped up to the moment. So you have 4 guys that have Big Ten starting experience and playmaking experience. So that's where you start and stop with that room. They have to lead by example and making plays.
It's a full room. It'll be competitive. And it'll also free up Tony White to make some decisions to be fluid in some of the play calls. They'll have opportunities to do some explosive, exciting things. Let's hope we get that done. Jay Foreman, thank you, kind sir. I want to thank the folks for making Locked On Huskers the first watch and listen each and every day. The second listen should be Locked On College Basketball. Isaac Shade, Andy Patton take you through and get you prepared for March Madness and all the goodness that is college basketball. You can do that on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube and whatever other way you consume your podcast. We'll close this podcast episode with the 3 words that we love so much. Go Big Red.